Alright, this is a review of Deus, and what you're seeing in front of you is the ending of a two-player game with maybe a few pieces got accidentally moved around, but this is basically the end position of a two-player game. And if you want to find out how to play this game, I'm actually going to skip that part. I'm not going to show you how to play it, but Rado has done a run-through. That's probably the best place to go, is check out his run-through. And there have been several other reviews of this game where people have kind of gone through a little bit of the gameplay. So I'm just going to jump right into what is excellent about this game and what maybe some people have had problems with. So it's hard to really see with this zoomed out image, so I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit. So let's go to the board first. You've got a board, and this game has an area control element to it. It's an area control element, but it's not an area control element where areas actually change hands. Once you take an area, for example, once my blue token goes into an area, or the orange token for the other player goes into an area, that area is theirs unless something moves out of the area and it's empty. And these military units can actually move, so those could actually move out of an area. But it's basically yours. So once you get an area, there's no more fighting over it. It's yours unless you decide to give it up. So that is an interesting part of this game. So you have these tokens that go out on the board, but really what drives the game is your tableau of cards. And this is an ending position to a game, a two-player game. And I had quite a few cards out this game. I've played other games where I haven't had as much of a tableau, and the way the game ends, it varies. So some games you might have an absolutely huge tableau, other games you might have a smaller tableau depending on how the game unfolds. But basically what happens in the game is, we got these boats here, for example. The boats come out, you play a card, and you pay the resource, and you play the card out, and you put out the token that goes with it, and you get to take an action on the bottom of the card. In this case, it's sell 4 clay for 4 gold each. So I remember when I took that card out, I actually had placed out some of these resource cards here first. I got myself some clay, and then I sold it with this card. So there's a lot of comboing that goes on in this game with these cards. So they come out one at a time, and the interesting thing about it is that when you place a new card out, it goes out on top, and then the powers activate in order from bottom to top. So you get all of the powers of the cards again when you activate a new card. The limiting factor is that when you run out of these tokens to put out on the board, you can't put out any more cards. So there's a cap on how much your column can do. So you want to get the most out of each card. You just don't necessarily want to play a card arbitrarily, though you will from time to time, just because you want to get maybe the other actions below it. But there is a cap, so if you don't use your cards wisely when you build them out in the order, you're gonna not really maximize what you do. So you want to, like going back to the boat thing, I wanted to have some clay before I played out this card. And if I was to play another one of these boats, I probably want to see if I can go out and get some clay first, because then I'm going to be able to sell the clay again. So it's kind of a cascading effect if you can be prepared to take advantage of each of the cards. That is a really neat element of this game. These buildings here, these sort of pea green buildings, are production buildings. A lot of these buildings are going to give you resources. These are science buildings. A lot of these are, let's see here, a lot of these, well, they've got there's a variety of actions here. Some of them give you victory points, and some of them allow you to do some of these offering type spaces, but doing it through the use of playing out a card. Let's see, a lot of these have victory points on them, and then you have your military units here. The military units are these guys, and they go out on a board, and you can only ever have one of each type of a building on a space, so you can't just pile up all the same units on one space. But let's say I put out my military unit out there. Let's say I played a card and put out my military unit, and then all of my military unit cards are going to activate. And one of the interesting things about this is that a lot of these military cards allow you to move your military units. So this is one way where you can sort of block off people or move out and expand in areas where you wouldn't normally be able to expand. So this particular card right here allows me to move all my one of my military units 0 to 4 regions. That's a pretty big jump. So for example, if I wanted to get over here, let's say I want to get this unit over here, I could go 1, 2, 3. I could get actually all the way over here with that military unit. So it helps you spread out and not get trapped in. And then finally you have temples, and the temples are the end of game scoring. And there are various victory conditions at the bottom of this. You can only have as many temples out as your highest area. You can see your first temple is free because it lines up here. To get your second temple out, you actually have to have this level all finished out. To get my third temple, and I could not build a third temple because I don't have another level up here. I've only completed on this level what these four cards. I need to finish this card, then I would be able to build another temple on top of that. And the game ends when either all the temples are out or a barbarian village all of the barbarian villages get surrounded. So that's generally the workings of the game. What are the pluses and minuses of the game? The pluses, I think, are the card play. I really like that I like games where you can build out a tableau like this, so I like tableau building games. I like how the columns are capped, though, because a lot of tableau games you can just keep building out in your tableau an infinite number of times. Whereas this, because it's capped at 5, it forces you to really consider what card you're going to play, because you might not play in another tableau building game, you might just play a card out just to put it in your tableau, even though it's not that great. And this, if it's a card that isn't going to do you much good, you're going to really seriously have to consider whether you want to play it or not, because you're limited to 5 possible levels in your column. I like that about the game. What I think sets this game apart from other types of games, maybe that are similar, is this discarding mechanic, the offering mechanic that I just kind of went over, where you actually can do something when you discard your cards, and do something that's actually very useful and pretty powerful in the game by discarding your cards. That is a really neat aspect of the game too. The game is it's first and foremost a Euro, and what attracted me to the game originally was the card play on it, and I think that is the highlight of the game. But it also has a little bit of a civilization feel, and I would say the theme works, but it's not what I would call a true civ building game. You get the feel, though, that you are building out a little bit of your empire. But the big difference between this and other civ building games is you can't attack other players. You're only ever going to attack barbarian villages, and you're never going to be able to attack directly other players. And for me, I can go both ways on that. I like games where you can attack other players, but the kicker for me is my wife doesn't like that, so if we're going to play a game together, it's better to have it like this game, and that's what makes this game probably more of a Euro than a Civ Builder game, is you're not really going to be able to attack other players. So I think actually like it in this game because it makes it more accessible and a little less mean. But what you do have is you do have this area on the board where you will be fighting for some control in some areas on the board. You can cut off people in this game. So when a player moves into a space and they put out a building, that space becomes theirs and it cannot be taken away from them. The only exception to that might be is if you have a military unit out. And some of these military cards actually allow you to move your military units. This one here actually allows you to move a military unit up to 4 regions. A region is one of these resource spots. So you could actually move a military unit and leave a space vacant, and then it becomes open for another player to play a card and move into that area. So it's possible to get cut off in this game, but then again, with these military units, you can get cut off, but if you just, all you have to do is put out a military unit and play a card that allows you to move your military units, and you can move through other territories and get sort of uncut off. The other thing you can do is you can give up 3 victory points and put out a unit anywhere on the edge of the board that is eligible for that type of a unit. So even though you can get cut off, if you get cut off, it's really, quite frankly, your own fault in a lot of ways. I know I came across some criticism that you can get really cut off and trapped. I didn't really find that to be the case if you are aware of what's around you and what other people might be able to do. The only person that I played that got cut off put themselves in sort of a spot at the beginning of the game, and being new to the game didn't really realize that they could potentially get cut off if someone moved into the space, and that's exactly what happened. And then they had to play boats to get out, but they didn't really have boat cards to get out of that position, and it wasn't really about being able to, oh, it's so mean, I got trapped in the corner. It was more about the initial placement on the board. And I think that was something that could have been avoided if the person really understood the game. Being a new player, they didn't really realize that that is something that can happen. So I don't think that... I really think that the military units that can move really are the perfect balance to this concept that you can actually kind of cut off people as you are expanding out. You can kind of put some pressure on them, but you can't really totally stop them from spreading out. And if they dedicate a little bit to building out some military units, they can get out of a jam. I think that works very well. Another complaint that I kind of heard about the game was that, oh, these temples, if you don't get the right temple, you're going to be kind of at a real disadvantage at the end of the game when the end of the game scoring comes. Well, my thought on that is you can cycle through your card deck really quickly in this game, especially if you take these science actions. Now, it's true, you might get a hand where you don't have the type of card that you want for the type of action you want. But you can cycle through this deck. I think in every game I've played, the deck has at least gone through in its entirety at least once. I think I've shuffled the deck at least once in every game, and I think we almost got through the deck twice in a game. But, so, the deck is going to cycle a lot. And you're going to be seeing several temples during the game. If you want to see several temples and cycle in through some of these cards, you're going to be able to see several of these temples. And you're going to be able to get your hand on some of these temples. Now, if you decide that you're going to use a temple and just discard it and put it back into the stack to take an action, a wild card action, well, you might be giving up a temple that you might want later, and somebody else may grab that. Well, that's part of the game. You've got to decide. You can build a temple early to lock in something that you know is going to be your long-term strategy, or you can let it run and hope that you can get it back. And it's just kind of one of the advantages and disadvantages. You can hold cards back in your hand, but you don't want to do that too often because you're kind of clogging up your hand if you do so. So I don't really think that getting a hold of the temples is really that much of a problem. To me, it's not really a random draw. You've got to, you can't just say, I'm going to just do all this stuff out on the board and hope I get the right temple at the end of the game. And then be disappointed that you didn't get the right temple draw, and then blame your loss because you didn't get, just on luck because you didn't get the right temple draw. Towards the middle of the game, you're going to have to probably decide if you're going to play out one of these temples and play one out. And then start going for some of the options on this. I think when I played this temple out about the fields, I only had one field out at the time. So, but after I played that out, I knew that it was in my best interest to try and get some more fields. I think at the end of the game, I actually only had 2 fields. So I got 8 out of the 12 points. Still not bad. And this one here was at the end of the game, gain 2 victory points per region with at least 2 buildings. I knew I wanted this temple too because this one was fairly easy to do. And I have been building out a lot of areas with 2 temples. So I didn't let this go when I got it. I held on to it and then played it. You know, there's a similar temple to a swamp, as is that field. What's some of these other ones? Another one's a mountain. It's really not that hard to get these areas. Here's one per lot of 5 cards. That one's probably a little harder. Well, not necessarily. It depends on what you're doing in the game. Have a lot of control over the cycling of the deck and what cards pass through your hands. But at times in the game, you're going to have to let cards go that you might normally want to hold on to, but you need to let them go in order to take the offering action to get resources or whatever. So, actually, I think that though there is some luck in the draw, like any game that involves cards is luck, I think there's less luck in this because of the ability, especially with this science, what is that science? Minerva, to get like possibly you can get 10 cards in your hand with that if you make an offering to that. And that's a huge, I don't know how many cards are on this deck. This deck isn't super huge to begin with, and 10 cards is a big chunk of that deck at one time to have if you play that out right. 96 building cards. So one play of that at its maximum is going to get you about 10% of the deck at once. So you can cycle through a lot, which I think takes out a lot of the element of luck that a lot of other deck builders have, because you can do turn after turn after turn in some deck building games and never draw that card that you really need. Whereas in this, if you take a science action, yes, you're discarding, but you're kind of almost discarding at double the rate, because your hand size is normally 5. You can actually get yourselves 10 cards, so it really compensates for that. So I think there's actually less luck in this game. And it comes down to being smart about when and how you play your cards. So you have to be very smart about that. Or you will feel the element of luck at the end of the game if you're not conscious of that, because it will all suddenly pile on you at the very end in that last round when you realize that, oh no, the game's ending and I didn't set myself up in the way that I wanted to. I should have been doing that 3 or 4 turns ago. I like that there are 2 ways to end the game. You can end the game by surrounding all the barbarian villages. You can also end the game by exhausting the temple supply. So the game does not last very long. It ends pretty quickly. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and you know, there's some player control in when and how it's going to end, but you can't pinpoint exactly well, you might be able to guess the round is going to end. It might come down to there's one temple left and you know somebody's going to be able to build it, so that's it. But the end of the game can all of a sudden be upon you very quickly when the situation on the board changes. You know, a couple of barbarian villages might fall in a turn, and all of a sudden you realize, wait, there's only one barbarian village left. That's not going to be there for very long, and the game's going to end. I like how the game. What's the game length on the box here? It says 60 to 90 minutes, definitely. It's going to finish in 60 to 90 minutes, and it could finish even less than that, I think, with a two-player game for sure. Especially if people are familiar and know what they're doing with their cards. Other pluses and minuses. When you play out, once your tableau gets built out, let's focus on this tableau because I keep having it off screen. When your tableau builds out and you start playing cards at the very top of your tableau, you get these cascading effects of actions, and I think it's very satisfying to have all of these actions, but it's also really powerful how a lot of these actions can build up at the end of a game. So, you know, with this military thing, like, this thing allowed me to collect gold next to barbarian villages and move a lot of my armies. So if I played a military card, all of a sudden my armies could just kind of move out into space out there and wreak a lot of havoc or steal a lot of spaces, so to speak, and get in people's way. And that probably is something that can be annoying. A lot of these actions really cascade upon themselves. I like how they build up like that, but you can get these pretty massive you can get like a massive amount of resources by playing out here right now, like this. And I think that's pretty neat, but it's also maybe feels a little swingy, I guess. I'm not sure, but you know, so your empire becomes very powerful by the end of the game. I think that's pretty neat, and I guess that kind of follows the theme of your civilization as it gets more powerful. You really do get more powerful, and your empire can do a lot of things at once, or get a lot of things at once, or make a lot of movements at once towards the end of the game. So that is pretty neat. It gives it that a little bit more of a Civ feel. Let's see what else. Played this game about 5 times, and one of the things about games like this is people tend to sort of figure out combos in the game that become very powerful, and I haven't played it enough to really see, like, is there a sort of a dominating strategy in this game yet. I'm tending to think that there is enough variety in what you can do that there isn't yet. I've played a couple of games on it's on one of the German sites where they have this game that you can play online, and I've seen some games where some people just try to rush out and grab the barbarian villages, and that is a pretty powerful strategy. I remember I came in second in a game where somebody was just rushing out and moving out and getting the points from all the barbarian villages, but despite that, and I didn't lose by very much, I didn't bother with the barbarian villages, and I went for points through the temples and through combinations on the cards, because as this player was moving out and getting all the spaces, they were playing like military cards out, they didn't have as much of a tableau in some of these other areas, so I was getting resources and then converting the resources into points another way. So it felt to me like it balanced out such that if you see points on the board from barbarian villages, I mean, yeah, you should go for them. But if somebody else is rushing out and getting them, yeah, you want to slow them down. But you can still win by putting out temples and harvesting points in other ways through your boats and resource combinations, or your science and civil buildings. It seemed to me that the different strategies could be countered, and the person who takes the best advantage of what they have in their deck, or what they have as far as the availability on a board, is probably still going to have the edge to win. So it seems to me so far it's balanced, But again, I've only played it 5 times. What I've got to do is play this game 30 times and come back and tell you if, because I think after 30 plays I'll begin to really see the inner workings of the game. And so right now this is definitely a top-notch game. It's got a lot going for it. I think it definitely is one of the better, definitely one of the top games of the year so far. Right now my favorite game to come out this year so far has definitely been The Alchemists, and that is a really thumbs up game, if you don't mind deduction type games. But this one here so far this year, it's a close second. I haven't played all of the games that have come out this year. I haven't played some of the real heavy games like Kanban yet, but this one is definitely one of the top games of the year. At least maybe try and maybe play it online first if you're having your doubts. But if you like a game where you can build out a tableau, you don't mind having a board. I guess this is one of the new trends, is to actually have your card play and the board mixed together like the game Trains. And I like the game Trains too. This one is a little easier to break out than Trains, but excellent game. So is Trains, by the way. Okay, let's check in with what the geek says here. Wavy Hill writes, What I love, the ability to use offerings, discards to draw and find what works best for the engine you are trying to build. The best tableau builder I have played is replacing Race for the Galaxy and San Juan for me, mainly because it feels like I have a lot more control over the luck factor than in those games. The luck factor is about as low as you can get in a card-based game once you know what you are trying to do. Great feeling of getting a lot done and actually improving as the time goes on. Quick turns, except maybe last few super turns that you can build. Amazing and fun. Skills definitely rewarded. What dislike, while you can steal small amounts of money and victory points from your opponents, you could also mildly block portions of the map. I wish I could push players out of certain spaces on the board. Currently, it's in its unexpanded form. Once a player claims a territory, it's theirs and only theirs for the rest of the game. All right, I'm going to go back to the what I like part. I think that's absolutely true about the... I like how you can use some actions like discarding cards that are actually positive actions and allow you to cycle through the deck faster, and I think it does take out some of the luck in the game. Now, I know that Nick from Board Game Brawl, in his review, was disappointed with the luck factor in this game, and I got to kind of disagree with that, because I think this game is, as far as, I mean, any game with cards is going to have some level of luck. And I know Nick is a big fan of deck builders, which really kind of surprises me, the criticism about the luck in this particular game, you know, which has that feel of, I mean, it's not a deck builder, but you are going through a deck of cards because of the way you can cycle through your cards. Whereas in a regular deck building game, you are at the mercy of the order that deck is in, and there's really not much you can do to change the order of that deck. Whereas in this game, you have a bad hand, you can discard it. Not only can you get the cards back, but with some actions, you can almost double your hand size. And a lot of times you're going to be holding a hand of 7, 8 to 10 cards at one time. So you have a lot of options. And if there's something that you're really trying to go for, you can try to cycle through that deck. I also do like the quick turns in this game. As far as tableau builder, I don't play San Juan. I don't play Race for the Galaxy. But I do have Imperial Settlers, and I think I like Deus better. I would reach for Deus before I would reach for Imperial Settlers, but I do like Imperial Settlers too. And what Wavy Hill dislikes is the small amounts of money and victory points that you can steal from your opponents. I don't mind that. and he doesn't like how you can block portions of the map. I actually kind of like that. I actually like that there is a little bit of a fight over the places on the map, and I do like that when you actually control a part of the map, you control it. Excuse me. If you could actually fight over the control of those spaces on the map, it would probably make this a terrible two-player game. Because all you would be doing would be going, you take my space, I'm going to take it back. You take my space, I'm going to take it back, which is what happens in a lot of area control games. So in this, what I do like is, once you get that area, it's yours, and everybody else is going to have to maneuver around it. And there is a little bit of a race sometimes to get to certain areas on the board first, and there's sometimes a little bit of a choke points. But then again, with some of these armies that can move 4 spaces, you're going to be able to outmaneuver and get around some of those choke points pretty easily too. So you're not really hemmed in very often if you plan right. Let's go to V Monroe. I'm going to skip down here to, it reminds me of Samurai, Seven Wonders, Bruges, Innovation, Small World, San Juan, many excellent medium-light games. And I think this game is definitely in there with some of the better medium-light games out there right now. Ignore anyone who says that Deus has limited player interaction. There's no direct combat. You can't throw someone off a territory, but boy, can you mess with someone's plans. You can plant your troops next door and steal their money. You can fight like ferrets in a sack to surround a barbarian village and take VPs before the other player. You can block people off, stopping them accessing the territories they need to generate valuable resources. And I think that there is definitely some really good player interaction in this game. I do like, and it's because of the board and because of the way that you can play out on the board, which makes this game more interesting than a sort of a tableau building game that doesn't have sort of that board built out there. And it's like Trains in the sense that this is another one of those games that we're probably going to see more of them, where you have a hand of cards that plays out things on a board, and there's some territorial fighting and racing going on in the game, and I think it adds a lot to the game. Alright, let's check in with Chad Boyd 2000. I want to jump down to one of these paragraphs towards the end here. It says, there's also some board play that will affect how effective a lot of the cards in the deck are for you. Every time you add a card to your display, you place a building on the board. The board in your available buildings to place on the board will affect what you are able to play or what cards you may want to put into play based on your board positioning. Overall, a solid game that I look forward to playing more of. And that's one of the neat things about the game is like how powerful your cards are depends on what you have out on the board. Some cards are more powerful if you have a lot of buildings on single spaces. Some cards are more powerful if you're spread out to a lot of different types of areas, or you have a lot of a certain type of area. So the strategy that you go for with the cards you're trying to collect and play out depends on how you are playing out on the board. Are you sort of spreading out to a lot of different areas, or are you concentrating on a smaller area but trying to build up a lot of buildings on a smaller number of areas out there on the board? So I think that's pretty neat. We gotta see how Soccer Star 001 weighs in on this. And I jump down to, I love games with this mechanic. The mechanic being making a player choose between how to play the cards he has. Each card can be a building or an offering to the gods, and on top of that, the bonus you get from the god is dependent on the top card you discard. I find myself in several situations where I had a particular building I wanted to build, but no wooden piece of that type, and no other cards of that type to offer the gods. These situations cause interesting decisions and tactical reorganization of your plans. I think I also enjoy those type of decisions. You have these cards, and they can be used in a couple different ways, and sometimes you need both of the options on a single card, and if you use one option, it kind of ruins the other option. So I enjoy that. And continuing on, the game is also wonderfully balanced across player counts due to the modular board setup. Too often games that play up to larger player counts can feel too open with lower player counts due to their abilities to separate and keep to themselves. This game manages to keep all players in close proximity across all player counts and adds to the tension as well as providing good interaction. And that's something I hadn't really considered, but with a smaller player count, you have less of those tiles out, so you're still going to get the same level of fighting over spaces as you would with a larger game with a few more tiles out, and you're always in a position to have some interaction with the other player. You can't really avoid it in the game. And so I think that's one of the advantages of the tile setup, and I also like that the tiles are double-sided, and there is some randomness in how the board's going to set up every time too. It's nice. It's also nice that with such simple rules, the game is really accessible while also providing a great deal of depth, which is a good balance to accommodate players of all intensities. Definitely a winner in my book. And it is really nice to find a game like this that is pretty straightforward and easy to teach, but has got a lot in it in terms of the decisions that you have to make. And there's a lot of depth in the play, but yet you can bring in new players and players that are maybe not super experienced with gaming. You could get them into a game like this, and they would enjoy it. All right, let's go to Surya. And I'm going to jump down a little bit here to the theme is pretty much pasted on, and I feel like the graphical design is too clean for the theme they chose. But that's all nitpicking. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really like the graphical design of the board either, but at least it's clear. One thing that annoyed me was that the temples are limited to those available. That means that if the game end is triggered, but you still get to perform a turn, you won't be able to build a temple even if you have the right cards and resources. That will hurt your score. I feel like more temples should be available after the end of the game has been triggered. Well, that's an interesting thought, really. Because, yeah, it's true. That last person may grab that last temple, and that might put them ahead in the number of temples they have, which is going to give them a scoring edge. And if you complete that round, everybody's going to might get one more turn, and you're not going to be able to build a temple. And you might have been positioning yourself to build a temple, ready to build a temple. Now you can't. So maybe having some temples in reserve, like so the end game triggers and having some temples in reserve so that people can build something on that final turn if they need to. That's an interesting thought. It's not really something that really occurred to me, but that is an interesting thought. I don't know how that would affect the game. Maybe that would improve the game a little bit. But as it stands, I don't mind it that much, because the person who triggers that end game, there's a reward for positioning yourself to end the game first, and your reward is you may get that last temple. Adabisi, not sure how to pronounce that, rates it as a 5, but he's got a couple of good points here. I like creating combos of cards and how the turns go fast. The best part is trying to figure out how to play your hand and make the most of it. However, in the end, I'm not too fond of this one. It just feels a bit cheap when you can discard your whole hand of cards to get resources you need, and even some extra. The game allows you to build an engine, but why bother? Just discard a bunch of cards, get resources, replenish your hand, and play the best scoring cards you got. I think that's an interesting point. You know, it's so easy to take a really powerful action discarding your cards. It's almost as it can be almost as powerful as playing the buildings that you're building. In fact, it's actually probably more powerful earlier in the game because, you know, when you only have one building out, that one building isn't going to do much for you. Just the discarding of cards is actually going to get you a lot more. But even so, I didn't have the same opinion that Adobisi says on this, because you're always struggling between what cards to keep, which ones to discard. A lot of times you want to play a card, but you really need to discard it to get the action. So I think those things play out pretty well. I wasn't bothered by that, but I can see that, you know, it's almost too easy to replenish your hand and get resources and stuff. Or on face value, it seems too easy. I don't think it is, but because at the same time, you're in a race against other people. So you need to build up your engine as quickly as possible. But at the same time, you have to take some of these discard actions to get things that you need. Let's see here. I also have a feeling that the game was play tested with a group of players thinking too similarly. To be more precise, I honestly do not see why anyone would bother building more than a maximum of 2 or even 3 cases, or in extreme cases, 3 buildings in one spot. Since essentially, you are still racing to raid the barbarian villages and to finish the game while trying to grab as many odd points as possible along the way. But there are still cards in a deck that require you to have 5 buildings on a single space. The only case I can envisage such a thing happening would require a player to be cornered without any possibility of expanding. This is due to the fact that building onto the same spot where you already are does not usually help your progress. And the truth is, I think he's right on this, because there are cards in the deck about where you get a power from building 5 buildings onto a single space. I don't think in any games that I've played, I've only played 5 times or so, 5 or 6 times, that I don't think I've seen anybody build 5 buildings onto a single space in a game. It seems to be much more advantageous to kind of spread yourself out a little bit more. So those cards that reward you for 5 buildings are much less useful, and maybe even somewhat pointless. But I'm sure somebody out there who's figured out a way to win using that strategy. Finally, let's go to Taraba here. The game is really random. I had high hopes, but it was such a disappointment. It is not as quick of a game as I've heard people claim. With the draws, you have to be tactical, but someone else can get draws that form a coherent strategy, and you're just out of luck for that game. You might know how to counter that strategy, but if you're not drawing any of those cards, there's nothing to do about it. And possibly to a degree, you know, I think there are going to be people who feel this way about the game because it has got cards and it's going to be a random element to it. I kind of felt that because you're able to discard cards and draw back a lot of cards in your hand, that it does kind of reduce some of that randomness. But, you know, if you're looking for a Euro game that doesn't have that element of randomness, this is not going to be the game for you. And probably any game that has some element where it's driven by cards is not going to be a type of game that you want to pick up if you don't like that element to it. What I have been arguing with this game is that because you can cycle through the deck a lot, it takes some of that randomness out. But, you know, if your opening hand is really great and your opponent is stuck kind of trying to cycle through things a little bit, get something better, yeah, you're probably going to get a leg up on the game. And that's just kind of one of those things that, in any game with cards or dice, it's going to happen that you're occasionally going to have things go against you. But I didn't find it to be such a negative element, because in the game, maybe you start out with a bad hand, but your opponent's got a great hand, but later on, they're going to be having to cycle through cards too. So I think the odds are it's going to even out to some degree. But, the luck factor is there to an extent.